The sky was already abundantly covered with stars, but the huge glass building sparkled no less brightly against it. Not surprisingly, this is one of the most expensive hotels in Chongqing, and the long-awaited guests had already arrived. The guy in the back seat of the car was listening absent-mindedly to Abigail, which made him smile awkwardly. She was really talking about something important, and she reminded him that their marriage had been going on for 5 years, which was partly why he might be in danger at today's event. According to her, Liam should have left the city and laid low, for which she would give him some money, but he was so inattentive that he simply fell asleep. So the young lady did not touch him, but simply got out of the car and ordered the butler to let the boy sleep. As soon as she stepped out on the red carpet, the crowd immediately started cheering. Everyone was raving about her beauty and expecting something really great to happen at her birthday party. But Abigail herself ignored the hype and just walked forward with a model's gait. Meanwhile, her husband began to receive attention because he had the misfortune to fall asleep with the window open. The rumors about him were bad. Some in the crowd were saying that he was a real fool and that it was not clear why Mrs. Volker was still married to him. However, people didn't notice one interesting thing about him, namely his amulet, which sparkled in the light with all shades of green, and it was strange what this thing was doing in such an ordinary person. However, people didn't notice one interesting thing about him, namely his amulet, which sparkled in the light with all shades of green, and it was strange what this thing was doing in such an ordinary person. From one of the hotel rooms we could already hear joyful exclamations. It was William Walker, Abigail's father, who was glad that the difficult times for their family were over and did not forget to mention the luck of silly Liam. But the Taoist Noah nevertheless noticed that it was thanks to this luck that the Volker family was able to get off their knees in those 5 years. However, the head of the family did not let up and assured her that soon that mythical luck would disappear and then the marriage would be over. Listening to all this, the girl seemed really worried, but she kept her composure. Seeing that his daughter had become very sad, the man began to encourage her, assuring her that she would no longer have to put up with that idiot. But this support did not help, and the young lady began to insist that she just let Liam go. William, on the other hand, did not listen to her and continued to say that today their marriage should be broken up in public, because she had already taken a liking to a young gentleman from the imperial court. It was this marriage that would help them connect with one of the most successful families in the city and become successful. At this time, the crowd outside finally waited for another guest. As soon as he stepped out of the car, all the women began to gush about his beauty and status. Of course, it was Ethan, the young gentleman of the Mitchell family. But he didn't care about the groupies. Today he was going to see his birthday girl. Only something caught his attention, namely Liam, who was still sleeping in the car. After learning from his manager who he was, the blonde decided to distract himself and say hello to the son-in-law of the Walker family. Mitchell's people started to wake the poor man up, but he just fell back into the seat without opening his eyes. The men immediately laughed at the sight, comparing the sleeping man to a pig, but did not notice how his pendant unusually sparkled, and Ethan himself just smiled in fake upset that he would not be able to talk. But then suddenly a piece of the mysterious pendant flew rapidly and crashed right into the back of the gentleman's head, and Liam suddenly woke up and, sitting down comfortably with the car door open, raised one hand, which was lit up with blue flames, and politely asked what he could do for the gentleman. The manager was immediately outraged by this impudence, but the blonde quickly stopped him and began to mock Liam, while the others constantly played along and laughed. Eventually, he leaned over to the Walker family's son-in-law and began to explain that today he would lose his status, and he would finally have Abigail. When he noticed that there was no reaction to his speech, Mitchell briefly became angry and did not miss the opportunity to criticize his opponent for his stupidity. But he quickly calmed down and moved on when he was called, telling him to ignore the asshole, which made Liam frown, ask what his name was, and get a little lost in his memories. He recalled how 5 years ago he had learned the art of magic and hoped that he could become famous through it, but the soul suppressor malfunctioned and locked his soul and power away. It was at that time that he was hit by Abigail's car and ended up in her family, where he lived the rest of his life, and today he will be abandoned and made a laughingstock. The guy got out of the car thoughtfully and continued to think about the fact that this girl was a really wonderful woman and probably the only one who did not want to disown him, but rather protected him over the years. So now it was his turn to protect his wife, and so he set out to meet the obstacles with determination. But then someone asked Liam if he had heard himself addressed, and reminded him once again that he was the star of today's show. This brazen man turned out to be James Wright, Abigail's cousin, and his girlfriend immediately picked up on it and began to shame the guy. Our hero recognized him immediately. It was James who took advantage of the fact that the Walker family did not accept him and secretly ganged up on him, physically abusing him. And now he wanted to make a nasty joke, so he spat into his glass and handed it to Liam, offering him a drink as a sign of apology for the insults, and then he would not hit him again, or he would drink the drink himself. However, the boy was not confused and took the glass, asking once again if he could really drink it. The crowd just burst out laughing, mocking the young man while he was actually putting the glass to his lips, and James was just proud of his incredible idea. However, Liam abruptly grabbed him by the face. Then he offered to go lower to drink, after which he knelt down and began pouring the drink directly into his mouth until he almost choked. When Liam got tired of this performance, he pushed his offender away, calmly asking if he was drunk, and the crowd around him fell into shock and indignation, also accusing the guy. Slowly getting to his feet, James tried to spit out the drink and soon began to accuse his opponent of ruining his reputation. He went completely off the rails and pulled a sharp object from his belt and rushed at Liam with it, but his arm was snatched away by a man. It turned out to be the butler, who began to reproach him for using such methods to completely ruin the reputation of the Walker family. However, the impudent man did not let up and angrily refused to retaliate, complaining that they had tried to humiliate him, but Volker's butler was still able to stop his dust. James stopped being indignant only because the butler told him that the master wanted to see Liam immediately, and only then could he take revenge. In the end, Abigail's brother admitted his guilt and left, deliberately hitting the boy with his shoulder, after which the butler called the Walker's son-in-law to follow him. And although the scandal was relatively quiet, James was already thinking of a revenge plan. Meanwhile, the young man arrived at the meeting place. In the study, he noticed members of the Walker family at a long table, and Abigail's father gently invited him to sit down, which was a genuine surprise, because for 5 years the boy had not been given such an honor. William then began his speech about how the family had risen from the ashes over the past 5 years thanks to Liam's luck, but according to the Taoist Noah, it will end tonight, so he and Abigail must urgently dissolve their marriage, because otherwise the boy will have a bad influence on the family. As soon as the head of the family stopped talking, the first son-in-law of the family, Mason Brown, hastily pointed Liam to the divorce document and encouraged him to sign it quickly, mocking whether he could write at all. Then the second son-in-law, Oliver, intervened, once again hinting at his stupidity and laughing openly. He couldn't believe that they still thought he was a fool, but he didn't care, because he would have time to return the favor. Right now, the only thing on his mind was his wife, who was the only one who had treated him well all these years. But Abigail couldn't stand the mockery of her husband and exploded, demanding that they stop and respect him, to which the other sons-in-law just smiled awkwardly and agreed. That's when Liam decided that he wouldn't sign the contract unless the girl signed it, but if she did, he wouldn't stay here for a minute. At this time, the butler approached the head of the Volkers and said that a third young man, Mr. Yenching, wanted to talk to him about cooperation, to which the man was very happy. But the old servant added that the gentleman also wanted to see their family's most famous son-in-law, and Mason and Oliver began to argue about which one he was talking about. William immediately decided not to linger, and Mason followed him. Not understanding what was happening, Drake, the only son of the Walkers, decided to ask his mother who the gentleman from Yenching was, and she explained that his Parker family was much more powerful than the Mitchells. The fact is that everyone wants to cooperate with the Parkers, because by getting close to them, you can reach the peak of your career and status. Mary's mother gently hugged her daughter and reminded her that it would now be up to her to fight for the Mitchell family, and Liam was not even surprised to hear this, knowing that the Walkers were willing to sell their daughter for profit. Behind the trees, they suddenly heard shouts that they didn't have a son-in-law who beat people in public, but a young gentleman burst in anyway, making everyone surprised and tense, and Mary urged him to stand up because it was David Parker himself, and then kindly asked if he was looking for their second son-in-law, who had already begun to introduce himself. However, the gentleman quickly pushed the Walker's second son-in-law away and headed for Liam, laughingly noting that he had seen him beat up James in the hall. He briefly introduced himself, expressed his admiration for the young man, and asked to speak to him in private tomorrow, which left the Walkers in complete shock. Liam smiled slightly at this request and immediately agreed, after which he shook David's hand. But the Walker's mother and father could not recover, not understanding why this was happening, because the boy was just a fool. When they came to an agreement and Parker left, William immediately began to resent it, which Liam enjoyed watching. The head of the family was really worried, because if their almost ex-brother-in-law stumbled, the whole family's fortunes would fall. This could not be allowed to happen, so he immediately yelled at his daughter to sign the contract. To calm Abigail's indignation, her mother gently explained that their family needed to get rid of Liam, and that they would benefit from it no matter what. The girl picked up the pen and thought deeply, and the other family members' encouragement only served to disturb her. Her hands were already shaking, but she put the pen to paper anyway, hesitantly. Liam tensed up when he saw this. He didn't want to believe that the girl had chosen a family after all. But she abruptly crossed the contract across and stood up, slamming her hands on the table. She shouted that it was her husband who had brought the family out of decline and that he could not be betrayed like that, because how could he live on his own? No one was expecting this. Eventually, Abigail broke down in tears and cried, shouting that she did not like Ethan and did not want to get married again just for the sake of someone else's wishes. Mary was quickly angry at what she heard, but before she could say anything, the head of the family began to threaten his daughter to sign a divorce agreement. But this contract was instantly terminated, and Liam asked William with insistence if he realized that his daughter did not want to do this. The man was immediately outraged, and the other sons-in-law of the family panicked, but the boy did not pay attention and continued to reproach him for wanting to work with Mr. Parker, who was so precious to them. To be more convincing, the young man asked them to respect Abigail's opinion, or he would tell David something tomorrow that they would not like. But he immediately added that he would take the blame if anything happened to keep the Walkers out of it, but the head of the family still froze, not understanding why the young man had suddenly shown such a quick wit. Mason intervened, accusing Liam of being impudent and reckless, but someone assured him that he would take care of everything. Everyone looked sharply at the new guest and fell into a stupor, because it was Ethan, who continued to say that if there were any problems, he would convince the Parkers that this fool had nothing to do with their family. Later, Mason was outraged that William had allowed Liam to meet with Parker, but the man had no choice because it was Mr. Mitchell's will. He assured the Walkers that he was working with David's family and offered to compete with Liam for Abigail's heart, and the one who could withstand working with the Parkers would win. But her father still wanted Ethan to win, and then his daughter no longer doubted her decision, so just in case, he ordered the butler to send his unwanted son-in-law back to his usual state. Abigail took the opportunity to thank her husband for saving her, admiring him for taking the hit, but they were unable to talk because Thomas, the butler, reminded her that it was time to return home. She finally advised Liam to get some rest and asked Thomas to take care of him. Later, in the hotel restroom, two girls started talking about James's beating, and one of them felt sorry that they had missed it, but the other encouraged them that it was not over because she saw the gentleman calling a group of people. At that moment, Abigail also entered the restroom, and after hearing what she heard, she became very worried about Liam and immediately began calling the butler to warn him of the threat. While Abigail was on the phone, our hero, accompanied by Thomas, had already come out and quickly picked up the phone and reassured her that they were on their way to the parking lot. However, she said that she had heard that James wanted to take revenge on the boy for his humiliation, and the butler also reassured her that Liam would get home safely, because it was his duty. As soon as they finished talking, an armed group of men appeared ahead of them. Thomas remarked that he had found an opportunity to take revenge on James, to which he thanked him profusely and asked him to wait outside, after which the man left without another word. He didn't feel guilty at all, because he was acting on the orders of Chairman Volker, who had instructed him to make sure that his stupid son-in-law didn't see David tomorrow. And James was already on the alert. He furiously reminded Liam that he had disgraced him and had already thrown a heavy pipe at him. There was only a moment left before the real horror. Standing behind the door behind which the fight was taking place, Thomas opened it and shouted at James' men to break their legs and leave their faces alone, because William might need them to make Liam play to the public. Noticing that it was quiet, the man looked behind the door and was shocked to see Wright's men and himself beaten. Already in the hall, the young man warmed up a bit, and was glad that for the first time in a long time he had used the skills of a special clan. He stopped abruptly when he heard strange conversations. It was Ethan's manager talking to two fighters who were already waiting for a fun way to kill Liam and began to make fun of him and his marriage to Abigail. But the guy could not stand the mockery of his wife and boldly addressed the offenders, demanding that they apologize to her. The big man in white immediately started to get agitated, but his friend calmed him down and, recognizing the guy, immediately laughed with his friends. The laughing man was Sam, the head of the bridge group, who quickly walked up to Liam and mockingly repeated to him that tonight his friend Ethan would take complete possession of Abigail. The guy's mind was blown, and he punched him in the cheek with all his might and ordered him to apologize for his words again. When everyone saw the blow that made Sam fall down, they were seriously surprised, but the offender had already begun to get up and was indignant at how he had dared to hit him. Wiping away the blood, he looked fiercely at Liam and, no longer paying attention to the others, began to threaten to kill him. Ethan's manager immediately panicked, but Sam wasted no time in attacking our hero while his group was encouraging him to demonstrate his boxing skills. But Liam was not nervous at all, and when the attacker got close enough, he jerked him between the legs, which left everyone dumbfounded, and he fell to the floor in pain. The very next moment, he ordered his group to attack and finish the young man for him, after which the armed crowd immediately ran at him. Meanwhile, behind the well-known door, the Droritz Volker was bringing James to his senses, asking him what had happened. However, Wright himself did not know how his stupid son-in-law had managed to defeat them. While the whole pack was attacking the young man, and he was making some finger waves and whispering something, James recalled how his team attacked Liam, but he seemed to use some kind of magic and made them beat each other. At that moment, the guy used the shift technique and took the attackers by surprise. Hearing the sounds of a fight, James and Thomas were surprised to see Sam lying on the floor in the hall, bleeding, threatening his group for attacking him. However, the group members were genuinely surprised because they were aiming at Liam, who stepped sharply and hard on the back of the group's leader and warned him not to come closer, otherwise he might break a few more bones. The overthrown man did not calm down and emphasized that he was a young gentleman of the Bridge family and could not be treated like that, but Liam only pressed him harder and said that he did not care about that, he only wanted him to apologize to his wife. Sam did not understand why he was overthrown by this fool, if all this territory was surrounded by his men and belonged to his friend Mr. Mitchell. He had just come to watch the humiliation of the Volker's famous son-in-law, and the situation was clearly out of control. As soon as Liam suggested pressing harder, Bridge gathered his courage and tearfully apologized to Ms. Elizabeth, which made the young man smile with satisfaction and remove his foot from the other man's back, announcing his satisfied verdict. Mitchell's manager froze at the sight and thought that this event would probably be remembered for a long time. William's scream interrupted everything. In the company of Ethan and the butler, he was furious with his son-in-law, and Ethan began to ask the manager what had happened. The same men excitedly reported that Sam was only interested in Liam's personality, and he silently beat him. After hearing this, the blond man thought a bit and tried to figure out how he had managed to overcome Sam. Could the Walker family still have some power protecting their stupid son-in-law? After his reflections, Ethan scathingly rebuked the Volker chairman for not being interested in his own family, and that only the bridge group could be suitable for the desired trilateral cooperation, if the Mitchells were excluded. The realization of this scared William, and the young gentleman used it to make sure that after Liam's trick, the bridge group would no longer want to cooperate. The man was truly horrified because he realized that Noah was telling the truth and that his son-in-law's luck was over, and now he was only getting in the way of the Walkers. So he decided to act and, bowing down, offered Sam a sincere compensation, to which he replied irritably that he did not expect sincerity from their family. Then the wounded man turned to Liam, assuring him that he did not care who was protecting him, because if he returned home in one piece today, he was ready to change his own name. When Abigail saw this, she was terrified because she realized that her husband was in danger again. Ethan, on the other hand, was completely satisfied because now there would be someone in town who would want to kill Liam without him. He asked Sam not to break the partnership of the three families over nothing, and he was beginning to get indignant, but the blonde turned his attention to William and hinted that it was time to go back and he had to understand who to take with him. The man instantly lit up and agreed, calling his family members to get in the car. However, there were not enough seats in the car, so he told his unloved son-in-law to take a taxi. The girl was very outraged and said that this was the same as taking her husband's life. This made William very angry, and he explained that he was only sending Liam home, giving him another day to become a member of their family, and if he could get to the meeting point, he would personally meet him. Mason chimed in, offering to pour tea for the young man himself if he could make it. But in the end, Sam agreed to cooperate, which pleased Ethan, and he told the head of the Walkers that tomorrow he would pick up Abigail to bring her to the Parkers to discuss cooperation, after which she could take on some of the responsibilities associated with it. William was obviously pleased with what he had heard and thanked the young gentleman. As he passed Liam, Mason mockingly said goodbye to him and emphasized that this was probably their last meeting, because he should ask the master to be done with him. The atmosphere made Abigail shiver, but she quickly pulled herself together and grabbed the young man, leading him away from the family, to the surprise of everyone. She firmly told her family that Liam was still her husband and she would not allow him to be treated like this. William tried to stop her, but Ethan blocked his path and assured him that it was okay, because he liked to watch his prey fight until they were his. A little further from the hotel, the right car was already parked among the trees. When Abigail saw her brother driving it, she was surprised, but he explained that her father had asked him to look after her because of the danger around Liam. He couldn't help but start yelling at our hero, asking why he was making a fuss. Liam, on the other hand, was completely calm and easily replied that Sam just opened his mouth to the wrong person. However, Drake did not calm down and began to explain that coming out is power, and being strong without power makes no sense, to which the girl immediately agreed and assured her husband that she would soon get him out of town, but now he had to be honest with her. The car abruptly took off and everyone tensed up, and Abigail shouted to her brother to get away from the pursuers. Her husband, however, immediately objected and began telling Drake to let him out of the car, because as long as he was inside, he was a threat. The girl was immediately frightened by what she heard and grabbed Liam, who was already determined, saying that if he got out of the car, he would be killed immediately. However, she unwittingly let go of someone else's hand because she could barely hold on to it after a sharp turn, and the guy immediately took advantage of this and got out of the car, asking Drake to protect his sister while her pleas to return were heard from the car. Our hero deliberately went further into the woods and waited. Seeing the victim, the attackers were amused that he had abandoned his wife and did not keep him waiting and ran at him under the command of Sam, while Mr. Mitchell watched with pleasure and listened to the fervent instructions of his friend, who wanted to deal with the guy himself. Meanwhile, the girl in the car was going crazy with excitement, and eventually demanded that Drake let her out and let her talk to Ethan, but he began to panic and refused. But Abigail had already run out of patience and ordered him to save Liam while she talked to Mitchell, otherwise she would disown him as a brother forever. This was the only way to persuade the boy. Wasting no time, they got out of the car and the girl immediately turned to Mr. Bridge, asking what it would take for him to spare Liam. Smiling wickedly, the group leader briefly explained that a fingerprint could be used to sign the document. So he would take the life of his famous son-in-law and use his fingerprint to sign the divorce agreement. But there was a second way. If Abigail agreed to marry Ethan right away, Liam would simply remain crippled. The young lady immediately protested that it was against the rules and that she shouldn't even think about it, but Ethan abruptly cut her off and pushed her against the car. He was already out of his mind and began to talk nonsense. The blonde said that he had already given the Walkers a chance 3 times for her, and now he wanted not only for her to become his today, but also for Liam to say goodbye to his life, which made Abigail really terrified. Drake was watching from behind a tree and was outraged that his sister could be treated like that, but he was afraid to intervene, so he tried to encourage himself, even though he was shaking. But his doubts were interrupted by someone asking him how long he was going to watch the girl being abused. It turned out to be Liam, whom Walker froze when he saw, asking where the crowd chasing him was, to which he replied that they were simply lost. Drake was a little embarrassed and began to blame the young man for his inaction if he was so strong, because he wanted to leave, but he couldn't take a step because he was shaking. After this speech, Liam indifferently left and reproached Walker for being a loser, which made him indignant, but the boy abruptly interrupted him and ordered him to remember his words. The frightened man looked at Liam, and the latter, rolling up his sleeves, said that when someone wants to hurt the one you love, you should respond in kind. With that, he confidently walked toward his surrounded wife. Walking towards his opponents, the young man continued his instruction, saying that it did not matter who was in front of you or what the consequences would be, because if you are a man, then be a man and strike without remorse. Seeing Liam, the girl became even more alarmed, and Sam did not hesitate to attack him, wanting to kill him. But our hero followed his principles and therefore skillfully hit Bridge with all his might. After the blow, Sam froze for a moment in painful shock and eventually fell to the ground, and everyone else was seriously shocked. Rubbing his fist and smiling, Liam turned to Ethan, saying that it was his turn, and the latter laughed surprisingly loudly, saying that he was crazy, because the Walkers had barely established ties with Bridge's group, and he had ruined everything. Pointing to the girl, Mitchell emphasized that now the Walkers would have to beg him for help because they could not prosper without him, and how dare the young man stand against him. He was already shouting madly for Liam to get down on his knees and promise to divorce his wife, because otherwise he would organize his end. However, our son-in-law quickly cut Ethan's speech short by punching him in the cheek and watching with pleasure as he staggered back from the pain, after which he remarked that garbage should be silent and know its place, but apparently he was lost. So to help find his way home, Liam pulled a trash can. Seeing this, the trembling blonde advised his opponent to think twice. But the young man didn't listen to him and jerked the tank over him, hitting him with someone else's body, causing Mitchell to instantly lose consciousness and fall to the ground. Liam immediately breathed a sigh of relief and stepped on the tank that now held his opponent, wondering where the money was. During the search, Abigail interrupted her husband, asking what was going on, because she had told him to stay in the car, and now he would definitely be disturbed. However, Liam said that it was only a one-sided damage, and with a sincere smile he handed over the money he had found for the car. The girl just froze, because she could not believe that this was really her husband, because in all 5 years he had only now shown how he could get out of the situation. Pulling herself together, she dragged Liam with her and called her brother, who was still in a stupor. Drake immediately responded, and soon they drove away, leaving Ethan behind. Even when it was over and they were driving through the city, Abigail couldn't calm down and reminded him that they would be leaving the city soon, but that he should be more careful now. Liam, counting the money, just laughed softly and assured her that everything would be fine. As soon as Liam told him to go home, Drake immediately became worried, assuring him that the walkers would not be able to protect him from his abusers forever, and even if they could, the head of the family would want to deal with him himself. The girl immediately agreed with this, and tried to gently convey that he should not stay in the city. However, the young man disagreed and said that no one would want everyone to know how he had been beaten by some fool, and the others tensed up a bit, listening attentively, and the boy summed up that his offenders would keep quiet, and even if he was taken away, he would still return, because at least tomorrow he would meet David. Abigail became even more worried, but her brother only wondered if his stupid son-in-law had such logic and thinking, and then told her that she should go home because Liam would return anyway, so resistance was useless. He also resolutely promised to protect her husband from now on, which made him smile confidently, and the young lady hesitantly agreed. They quickly agreed that they would warn their father that they were on their way home. Meanwhile, a ruckus was raging in the Walker mansion. William was very nervous, telling his family that he had already complained about Liam's behavior, which had caused the elder to want him to give up his position as head of the family to another. His first daughter, Susan, was outraged to hear that they would all be finished, and his second daughter, Eva, immediately chimed in, saying that their uncle's business was doing well and that if he gained power, they would be crushed. William was already furious that he would get the worst of it, and began muttering curses at his stupid son-in-law. Still, he pulled himself together and began to reassure the family that Mitchell had helped to deal with Liam and establish ties with the Bridges, so thanks to the three-way cooperation, the elder agreed to keep him as chairman. The daughters immediately breathed a sigh of relief, and Mason even teased that he hoped the asshole had been tortured, because it was better for the Bridge group. As soon as Drake called, his father perked up a bit, but when he heard that they had returned with Liam, he was so shocked that he dropped the phone. Susan immediately began to ask what was going on, but her husband couldn't even answer clearly, and could barely tell her who had returned. When the car drove up to the estate, the young man was already intrigued by what would happen next, while inside the house the Valkers were simply shocked by the news. As Drake walked outside, he wondered why he felt a chill down his spine after talking to his father, but he was immediately struck by the memory of his father's promise to throw Liam a party if he returned. When he realized the situation, young Walker froze with indignation, for he realized that his famous son-in-law had asked him to call in advance so that his father could prepare for the meeting and receive a moral slap in the face. When Drake imagined everything in vivid colors, he realized that he was in a complete mess and panicked. Noticing that her brother was trembling, Abigail asked what was wrong, but her attention quickly turned to her father and the rest of the family. The latter came closer, radiating aggression, but eventually smiled strangely and welcomed his son-in-law back. When Drake saw the head of the family's displeased face, he became extremely nervous, but the girl understood everything, and as soon as she turned to her husband, he immediately smiled innocently, asking if something was wrong. The young man pretended to be cute and pretended not to understand why they were looking at him like that, and young Walker was already frozen with fear. But Liam quickly turned his attention to Mason, kindly asking if his tea was ready. Abigail and her brother were shocked by this sight, because it was not enough that the head of the family met him, and now the eldest son-in-law had to pour him tea, which was completely insane, although Drake remembered that Mason had promised this himself. Soon, Mason was pouring tea and handing the cup to the young man, barely feigning politeness, and the guest was smiling so much that the two could not recover from the sight of it. But as soon as the first son-in-law turned away, his face twisted with anger, and he could only reassure himself that his head had also been injured. Meanwhile, William became furious and began to accuse his son of disobeying his orders and saving Liam, and the other sons-in-law immediately joined in and began to attack the poor man. But Abigail stood up for him and said that Liam had done it himself, and that her brother was only protecting her. However, the head of the family did not believe it, and shouted that Bridges' group should have been able to handle such a fool, and his son was just afraid of punishment, so he asked the butler to bring a whip. Drake himself had already sat on the floor and was reassuring himself that everyone didn't know about Ethan's beating, otherwise it would have been even worse, and meanwhile Thomas had already brought a whip and handed it to the master. To vent his anger, William swung his weapon and said that he would teach his son a lesson, but Liam abruptly grabbed his arm and addressed the older man, saying that even an evil tiger does not eat its own children, and whether he could stand it if he killed his son. William and Mary were immediately outraged by what they heard, and the woman angrily explained that it was only a family punishment and death was out of the question, and the other sons-in-law began to ridicule the young man for his prank and called it a real betrayal. Frightened, Abigail ran to her husband, begging him to stop, and Drake thanked him. The head of the family could no longer restrain himself and swung his club at Liam, shouting that he had become insolent, but Abigail immediately blocked him, causing her husband to shout for her to leave, because this impudent man had broken the family law. But the young man instantly grabbed the girl and kicked her away from the whip, which eventually hit the floor and scattered spikes across the room, which surprised William. Covering his wife with himself, Liam looked sternly at the chairman and asked what if this was not an attempt to destroy Drake, because otherwise why did the whip have so many spikes still flying in the air, causing everyone around to fall into a stupor, not understanding what was happening. Drake fell to the floor in shock and asked his father if he really wanted to destroy him. He immediately began to deny it, and his mother confusedly approached her son to calm him down. William quickly remembered the butler and began to interrogate him, but he made excuses, saying that he had simply taken the whip from the chairman's office. The man was furious and yelled at Thomas that it wasn't his fault and Drake could have been hurt because of his stupidity, but Mason intervened, noting that something was wrong and it was strange that only Liam noticed the spikes, probably he had hidden them there. But the guy himself, calling the others fools, laughed and added that he noticed not only the thorns but also the poison on them, which made William just freeze in a stupor. Mason had already begun to attack the young man, asking if anyone would dare to destroy Drake in front of everyone, and Mary, wiping away her tears, assured her son that they would never do that to him. The head of the family could not stand it, and shouted again that even if it was not true, it was worth checking and ordered Thomas to give the whip to Noah, a disciple of the Taoist, to test the poison. Soon Thomas came running back and said in a panic that there was indeed poison, and it was very dangerous. This news immediately made William feel sick, because he realized that someone wanted to kill Drake with his hands. His brothers-in-law and Mary immediately became furious and began to accuse Liam, because he was the one who noticed the poison and it was definitely him. Abigail pulled herself together and stood up for the young man, even though he was calmly drinking tea. However, the chairman didn't want to take it anymore and shouted that Liam had nothing to do with it, which made everyone seriously surprised. After collecting his thoughts, the man explained that if it wasn't for Liam's wit, Drake would be dead, so there was no point in arguing any further, and they should leave, and then he left. Our hero relaxed even more and thanked William, while the rest of the family began to leave in irritation, and Drake, turning to the young man, abruptly fell to his knees in front of him. This surprised the Valkyrs, but the boy continued to thank them for saving him and apologize for his rude attitude over the past 5 years. Liam smiled kindly and pulled him to his feet, saying that everything was fine because they were family. Later, in the gazebo, William asked his son if he was angry with him for the recent situation, but he said that he knew that someone else wanted to harm him. But he didn't play nice for long and immediately asked how Liam had gotten home, given the strength of the bridge group. Drake froze for a moment, and warned that it might be shocking, so he seriously asked his father if he had had a heart attack or high blood pressure. After hearing this, William began to pressure his son to talk, so he quickly became confused and began to tell the story, justifying that he wanted to save his sister, but Liam beat him to it and then knocked Sam down. Then the young man enthusiastically told about the fight in all the details. While listening to his son, the head could hardly contain his irritation, but finally he couldn't help himself and broke a cup of tea in his nerves. After hearing the story, William simply screamed in horror and suffered not only a heart attack and high blood pressure, but also many other serious conditions. Mary's cries came from the house, as she still could not believe that Ethan had been beaten. As she cried, she thought that the trilateral cooperation could now be forgotten and that her husband would have to step down as chairman, which made her daughter quite depressed. But when the woman panicked and shouted that she would prepare a new divorce agreement and that perhaps after signing it, Mr. Mitchell would have mercy on them, Abigail protested. But Liam appeared from behind the door and encouraged his wife, saying that it was just a collaboration and that tomorrow he would arrange it with the Parkers, which was clearly better than with Bridges' group. The girl was now more concerned about whether the young man had recovered, because today his behavior was no different from that of an ordinary person. He cheerfully replied that he was feeling fine, and Abigail hoped that he remembered where his home was, but even after thinking about it, he could not give an answer. The young lady immediately told him where the small things were, although she would have been more relaxed if he had been at home, and she knew that someone was taking care of him. Liam concentrated and seemed to remember something, and then began to tell me enthusiastically that his family was from the capital and the strongest in the country. He went on to boast that he had been taught martial arts, and that his family was all-powerful. This made the girl sigh heavily, realizing that the other man's disease was progressing. She gently interrupted him with a question about how he had been feeling for 5 years, and he was not able to answer right away, and Abigail was waiting tensely. Finally, Liam blurted out that all he cared about was that they had been married all these years and were a great couple, but for some reason the girl hadn't shown him any care or tenderness, which was a real pig. She was clearly not expecting to hear such a thing and was instantly outraged, asking who the guy had called a pig, and although he tried to justify himself, everything was flying at him. Agreeing that it was a bad comparison and rubbing his sore head, he quickly went to bed under his wife's offended gaze. The next day, Drake was already practicing hard by the pond while Liam was still in his pajamas brushing his teeth and watching him, wondering if it was yesterday's events that inspired him to dance the lion. Jumping to the ground, the young Volker said he was doing his family a favor, because if he won the city ceremony in 5 days, he could help with the problem of family cooperation. However, the son-in-law still wondered how dance could help with this, so Drake explained that this ceremony is held on the birthday of the head of the most powerful family in the city, the Hexel family, and this man is very fond of the lion dance, so by winning, you can win his favor, and thus take a step on the path to success. However, the boy knew that many families were still practicing, so the competition was too great, and he probably had no chance of winning, but he would keep trying anyway. But then Liam protested, as if who else had said that and that winning was an instant matter, and then spat out the toothpaste with force, which hit the huge bough and tore it apart. Drake was shocked by what he saw, and he emotionally asked if his son-in-law had been a gunman in his past life, to which he only said that it was difficult to answer, but he knew for sure that he was his wife's slave. A plan was already being born in Liam's head, because he realized that the victory would be very useful to the walkers, which meant that it would make Abigail very happy. Meanwhile, they were finishing decorating the mansion, and William summarized that Ethan would be arriving today and that he needed to be greeted in the best possible way. His daughter, who, unlike everyone else, was wearing a regular outfit, although she was beautiful even in it, quickly ran up behind him and eventually asked her father why he had called her. When her parents saw their daughter, they were shocked, and her mother immediately began to demand that she put on the dress as soon as possible, because Mr. Mitchell would be picking her up soon. But she was quickly interrupted by Liam, who was also simply dressed, and said that there was no need, because only Mr. Parker was coming today. Mary immediately began to blurt out that she was already feeling sick, and William began to attack his son-in-law, saying that Ethan would soon arrive and then everything would be clear, and that this restless man was probably just trying to annoy him. The young man remained calm and said that they might not believe him, but Mr. Parker did not like all the pathos that was being made here. Mason interjected and assured them that Ethan was a man of his word and would be there if he said he would. The second son-in-law added that Ethan had said that David would not be able to make it today, and Susan reminded him that the issue of the poison on the thorns had not yet been resolved. After all, Eve insisted that Liam sign a new divorce agreement and leave. Abigail was already quite irritated by what she had heard and reminded them that it was her husband who had saved Drake's life yesterday, and they were all just ungrateful, so she would not accept Mitchell anyway. The sisters immediately began to circle around her and gently told her that she was just inexperienced, but would change her mind when she got closer to Ethan. Hearing this, Liam laughed inwardly, because that blonde man couldn't even block his attack, and what a man he was after that. All the arguments were interrupted by the butler's shout, who said that Mitchell's exclusive limousine had already arrived, which meant he was definitely here. The head of the family and Mary were overjoyed at the news, because it meant that the guest did not hold a grudge against them. The first brothers-in-law immediately began to mock the fool, saying what he would say now and whether he felt humiliated. The guy was just as confident, and noticed that the wrong person had arrived. Everyone ran to meet Ethan, but David got out of the car, who was also dressed for the beach and did not understand why all the honors if he just came to visit. The whole family was frozen with surprise at what they saw, because it was Mitchell's car. William politely asked the young gentleman about the car, noticing that he was dressed just like Liam. David immediately burst out laughing and said that Ethan's face was terribly swollen, which was why he had sent him in his car. Liam noticed that he was right, which caused his brothers-in-law to glare at him, but Thomas raised the ruckus again, saying that the elder had ordered Parker to be received at the old manor, which made the chairman nervous. The young man thought a bit about the elder who lived in the old manor, since few people knew about him and he was actually the head of the Walkers, and William was only fulfilling his duties. Since this mysterious chairman had invited the guest to his home, even he was concerned, which meant that he had to organize cooperation with Parker to please his wife. Liam took the initiative and immediately volunteered to escort the guest when he asked, and even complimented the other man's outfit. His brothers-in-law were instantly outraged and told William to stop the fool, because he would make a mistake in front of Parker and then they would all be in huge trouble, but the man abruptly refused, surprising the others. But he explained that Ethan was holding a grudge against their family for not coming himself, and thus the cooperation was shaky, so they could only hope that Liam would be able to get cooperation from the Parkers. After the explanation, the chairman walked away, leaving the others in confusion. Soon after, at the old Volker estate, the current head of the family shared that he had invited David when he learned he was coming because he was concerned about the city's ceremony. The boy replied that today was indeed a big holiday for the Huxley family, as people everywhere were preparing for it, and after the elder asked him to help with writing, Parker eagerly agreed, boasting of his skills. Looking at the inscription, the young man thought a bit, and assumed that it was a very strong word that carried good impulses, but the older man said he was mistaken and, tearing the paper, said that it was unworthy, surprising the guest. Then the chairman explained that now Master Huxley was looking for young people all over the city to show his family in the best light, and that many masters had already presented their calligraphic works, and he could not even compete with these professionals, which shocked David, because he thought the work was wonderful. Upset, Oliver emphasized that Parker is known as the god of the pen and therefore, falling to his knees, begged him to write a paper for the ceremony, because it could save the Volkers. The boy himself was frightened by the tearful pleas, assuring him that he could not do it, but the old man replied that he would not get up until he agreed, because his life would lose its meaning if his family did not win. Realizing that he had gotten himself into trouble because of his boasting, David agreed to help, and the chairman instantly got to his feet, praising the young gentleman, and he was very impressed, because he realized that the older man was just pretending. Parker awkwardly asked that Liam be invited inside and that he write while talking to him, and that it would be easier for him, to which Oliver eagerly agreed. The chairman quickly went out and invited the famous son-in-law, saying that David wanted to see him, which caused the other sons-in-law to yell back at him and shout that it was only because of his luck. Once inside, Parker happily greeted his friend and explained that because of his bragging, he now had to help the chairman with his writing and wanted the young man to appreciate his work. Liam was surprised that his friend was also a calligrapher, but was horrified when he saw the result, and when asked if it was good, he suggested that he write it himself, and they say that David did it. The young gentleman was surprised to hear how good Liam was at calligraphy, and he explained that he had studied under a master who was truly called the god of the pen. David beamed, looking admiringly at his friend, and emphasized that he was counting on him, and he thought that he was really good at choosing people. The thing is, Parker really got interested yesterday because he noticed that Liam was not the fool everyone thought he was, but a real leader who was holding back his talents and waiting for his moment. He felt that his friend had a rather liquid aura, and such people usually have incredible skills, so he was not very surprised by his calligraphic skills. The young gentleman was confident in his friend's skills, so when he said that everything was ready, he looked at his work with great horror and could not understand how, because even he had written better, he still mistook someone else's talents. But then the chairman said outside the door that he was waiting, and David panicked and tried to fix everything to avoid losing face, but his son-in-law let the old man in, saying that everything was ready, and the young man almost fell over with fear. Oliver kindly asked Parker to show his masterpiece while he was hiding the papers behind his back in a panic and thought he would swap them and show his own, but Liam quickly broke his plans and raised his friend's hand, which had someone else's inscription. This made David panic as much as possible, because he thought that he had disgraced himself because of his friend and had to leave the city immediately, and Volker himself was shocked when he saw the calligraphy. Finally, the chairman managed to squeeze out some compliments and, as soon as he recovered from the shock, tearfully fell to the paper, proclaiming that the work was really worthy of the god of the pen and he had never seen young people write so well, and David was stunned by this reaction, asking if the result was really good. Instead, the old man continued to praise the calligraphy, admiring it, and remarked that Dev was too modest, because it says that great plans and great dominion, laughter despite the drunkenness of life. And this phrase rhymes with the name of Huxley and expresses the gentleman's great ambitions. In addition, the inscription was such that a fool would not be able to read it, and Huxley himself is very fond of such ancient writing. The chairman concluded that with such an inscription there were great chances of winning, and Parker was even outraged because he considered his calligraphy better than Liam's and, on top of that, he could not understand someone else's inscription, which showed his ignorance. However, he quickly got into character and indifferently replied that it was just a quick inscription, nothing special, so the old man could have it. But the young gentleman forgot to leave his signature, so Oliver asked him to do it right away. David was nervous about this request and said that he could not sign it, because it would mean that he was the owner of the letter, and he wanted to give it to Liam, so he should sign it. The chairman, who thought he was going to get a gift, was really shocked and asked if the boy was sure, to which he agreed and said that this way he would not have to reveal his identity. His son-in-law immediately went to the paper with a brush, and the old man was very nervous and asked him not to mess it up while David played along, and told him to write boldly and not to worry. The young man began to carefully draw out the signature, and at this time Oliver even grabbed his heart, because he was convinced that the second worst calligraphy belonged to Liam. But Parker interrupted the chairman's thoughts by suggesting that they discuss cooperation, which surprised him, as he had not expected the guest to come to discuss this very thing. The head started to take his son-in-law out, ordering him to wait outside, but then David intervened and explained that he wanted to talk to Liam and asked the elder to leave for a while, which made him blush and quickly agreed, because he had not expected this. Outside, William rushed to his father, asking how things were going, and was afraid that the guest had not come to negotiate cooperation, but the devastated old man explained that he was having a separate conversation with Liam and had given him a calligraphy, so their son-in-law's good fortune was their blessing. Everyone but Abigail was instantly outraged by this news. Behind closed doors, David thanked the young man for his help and made it clear that he would not cooperate for nothing. The fact is that the Volkers are losing to the Mitchell family, and he had previously considered working with the latter. His team is currently at their home and has been ordered to sign a cooperation agreement with them if Parker himself does not provide another team by midnight. But to be sure of his decision, David will ask his friend a few questions, as time is running out. If his son-in-law provides satisfactory answers, Parker will refuse to cooperate with the Mitchells, and otherwise he will say goodbye to the Walkers. Meanwhile, Mason continued to resent why Parker was discussing such matters with that fool, and his second son-in-law teased that even if Liam did agree to cooperate, they would not be able to expel him, and then he would bring misfortune on the family. William was very worried, but he said that David carefully chose his partners, which is why he was nicknamed the Young Master without success. The bottom line is that there are rumors that Mr. Parker asks candidates strange questions during negotiations and no one has ever answered them correctly, which is the reason for his business failures. But in his mind, the man worried that they had almost no chance, because Liam would make another mistake and it would be better if the old man did the negotiations. And David had already begun his interrogation and first asked whether Liam would take revenge or tolerate it if he was deprived of the credit for a major case, to which he said he would back down and give all the credit because he didn't care. Parker was completely satisfied with this answer, and he asked him with concentration what the young man would choose if he had to choose between power over the whole world and his beloved woman. The young man did not hesitate to answer that he would choose power over the world and sleeping with his beloved, and David, who was already excited, asked how he could use this in real life to achieve both goals and insisted on giving him a good answer, otherwise their conversation would end. At that moment, William received a phone call, and when he picked up the phone, Mitchell asked if Parker was discussing cooperation now, because in fact he had already agreed to cooperate with him and a formal agreement would be signed very soon, which shocked the chairman. Finally, Ethan mocked that the Walkers would soon have enough to worry about, and then ended the call while the chairman panicked and shouted that they could still discuss everything. But the man still hoped that they would have a chance to cooperate if he married Abigail to Mitchell. William sternly ordered the butler to bring the divorce agreement, because they had to marry the girl to Ethan at any cost. Abigail herself was already getting nervous about her father's determination. Meanwhile, Ethan himself was already thinking about how he would punish the Walkers and was glad when Parker's men came in, because he thought everything was settled. However, his plans were abruptly thwarted when he was told that Liam, unlike Mitchell, had answered all of David's questions correctly and that was why he was going to work with the Walkers. It was then that the friends came to the Walkers with the news of the cooperation, which was a huge shock for both them and the blonde gentleman. William couldn't believe that his stupid son-in-law had managed to negotiate a deal with Parker himself, but the latter explained everything by telling him about their conversation. When asked about power over the world, Liam cited the example of the fish and the bear, which is a popular favorite. But the young man explained that he didn't see the point of doing anything unless he received both rewards. He said that people think you always have to choose, but he doesn't think so, as long as it's not against the law, and then concluded that if Parker cooperated with him, he would become the first instead of his title of master without success. In the end, after this story, William was just stunned, not understanding how it happened, and Mason, as always, was angry that he did not get the glory and emphasized that Liam was just crazy, but David did not care and, after saying goodbye to his friend, he left relaxed, while Liam himself was happy that he was able to find the right words. While the sons-in-law were rejoicing, thinking that the chairman had indeed agreed to expel Liam, the man announced that all the quarrels were meaningless and that the business of cooperation was now complete, and that they should keep Liam around because he was their guarantee of success. So, reproaching the others for their short-sightedness, William left, leaving his brothers-in-law in shock. Ethan, on the other hand, was raging, throwing everything in the room and blaming Liam for his failure. He couldn't forgive David for his betrayal either, so he declared war on the Walkers and promised to show them that even Parker wouldn't help them. Soon Abigail came out after talking about cooperation with her father and grandfather and was about to leave with her husband, despite the angry looks and wishes for her downfall from her brothers-in-law, who were furious with the young man. But suddenly the Walker's second son Neil appeared in front of them with his son James. He began to attack the boy for beating James and humiliating him, and demanded an apology on his knees. But Abigail immediately intervened, noting that it was her cousin who started the conflict. But the man did not let up, and so Liam confidently replied that he was ready for any punishment. The brothers-in-law immediately began to complain to Neil that William and the old man were protecting Liam because he had made a deal with the Parkers, which the man did not believe, because how could the fool do such a thing? So he promised that he would talk to his brother and father so that they would punish the impudent man according to family rules. During the conversation, Neil was told that Liam had indeed entered into an agreement with Parker, which left him and his son frozen in shock. William even began to justify Liam, assuring him that James had started the fight himself, and the young man was furious because he did not understand why they were defending the fool. Finally, William began to reprimand the boy for insulting his son-in-law, and Oliver ordered the two to rewrite the family rules 10 times as a punishment, which caused their entire worldview to collapse in an instant, and they left dejectedly to Abigail's laughter and the indignation of their sons-in-law. Suddenly Liam turned to the girl and took her hand, which made her instantly embarrassed, because they were married only on paper and it was the first time she had ever held hands with a man. The young man asked if there had been any recent conflicts between Neil and her father. After a little thought, Abigail said that they hadn't gotten along since childhood and Neil considered her father his enemy, which made the boy realize that he was probably right and the spikes in the whip were Neil's doing, because after Drake's death, power would have passed to him, because William had no more sons. Nevertheless, the guy noticed his wife's blush and sincerely asked her why she blushed, and her sisters asked if she had a fever, to which she quickly refused, and she could not calm down from the fact that the young man was holding her hand. At home, James was screaming that he had to take revenge on Liam while he was trying to write all the family rules as quickly as possible, and suddenly his brother Leo came into the room and said he would help him with this. Seeing his brother, James was ominously happy, and the latter told him that in his absence he had joined the Brotherhood of Magicians and could deal with the enemy even with his basic knowledge, so he took out the bag with the snake in it. Later, Abigail sat behind a pile of papers and complained that her husband had taken such a big project for the Parkers but handed over all the management work to her, to which he said he didn't know anything about business, so he trusted her completely, even though he was just cleaning. The girl tiredly remarked that Liam only sews and cleans and maybe he should think about more ambitious tasks. The young man suddenly seemed to be electrocuted and focused, and the lady was happy to have inspired him, but just hit her head on the table when he said he wanted to go to the bathroom. When he went out into the corridor, he noticed a snake slithering away and realized that he was right, but it was only a spiritual snake and that his enemies hoped it would harm him, the heir to the 9 deep heritages. He drew the snake back with magic and wondered what kind of fool had sent it. Abigail suddenly called from outside the door, saying that Mitchell had arrived at her house and the young man suspected that he had hired someone to take revenge, but finally decided that he accepted the terms of the game and called his wife himself. On the street, Ethan had already finished the cooperation agreement with Neil, which made William and his wife depressed, and when asked by his daughter, the man told her what had happened while Mitchell himself was content to think how some of the walkers now regretted the lost opportunity. Liam walked over to the table where everyone was discussing and greeted them kindly, asking if Ethan had slept well tonight, and when he noticed the young man, he panicked at the memory of his humiliation, so he told Neil to discuss everything inside, despite his indignation. Liam was obviously pleased with the picture of Mitchell's escape and called the snake that had crawled out from under his pant leg, ordering it to return to its owner. His brothers-in-law and others began to panic that Neil would soon gain more power through his cooperation with Ethan and become the new head of the family. The young man reassured them that his cooperation with Parker was much better. Mason started shouting anyway that the Parkers hadn't been in town long enough to stand up to the Mitchells, to which the young man calmly replied that he would let them have their fun. After that, the boy used magic unnoticed, hiding his hands behind his back, after which screams were heard that frightened all the Valkers. Hearing the scream, Neil's sons rejoiced that Liam had fallen into their trap and laughing, James began to film the victim, posting it online. But suddenly the victim came out from behind the bushes and it turned out to be Ethan, over whom Neil himself was panicking, and all the viewers on the network recognized them. Everyone around him was frightened by what they saw, and Neil explained that the young gentleman had been bitten by a snake and ordered an ambulance to be called. The brothers whispered about the antidote in the distance, and Leo assured them that he would try to find it, because he was afraid for his fate. And it was their nervousness that our hero noticed, and he realized that this snake trick was because of them, namely Leo, whose snake energy he had noticed. At the same time, Mitchell's condition was deteriorating. So the young man decided to help and surprised everyone when he took off Ethan's stinking shoe, then took some water from the pool and soon poured it on the victim. Because of this, Neil and Mason began to accuse Liam of wanting to take revenge on the gentleman and wanted him to be caught. Suddenly the blond man began to spit out water and Neil immediately rushed to him. Ethan, having recovered, asked who had saved him and William instantly told him everything, which made the young gentleman angry and made him feel sick again. But soon an ambulance took the victim away, and Abigail told her husband that Ethan would want revenge for this method of rescue, so he should stay home for a while. Liam agreed and immediately called David and arranged to meet him at a bar. The girl was very outraged because she was worried about his safety, but the young man encouraged her by saying that Drake would accompany him, and that he himself could not miss this opportunity to communicate with Parker. At that moment, Drake arrived and promised to protect Liam.